Okay, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. I hope you can hear us clearly. So here I'm with Dima.
Yes, hi, assalamu alaikum everyone.
So I think we can get started. In any case, this will be recorded and probably be shared on Tarim Talks and also for Alami Sharia followers so that those who missed the conference can still know what happened here and the things that we talked about. So thanks for joining us with Tarim Seminars. It's really a great opportunity for us to connect with Uyghur community internationally and also share our knowledge about Islamic finance and probably help others to get inspired as well, just like we did. So as you know, we will be talking about conscientious finance and also about Islamic finance. Basically, we're gonna be introducing the basics. And I'm Guzelya, I'm an Uyghur living in Indonesia, and Dima is Indonesian, the CEO of Alami, which is an Islamic Sharia fintech platform. So let me go quickly show you the overview of today's seminar. So we will be quickly introducing about ourselves so that you know about our background. We will be talking about Finance 101, basic introduction to what the finance is, why conscientious finance, myths and realities of Islamic finance, objective of Sharia, and Islamic finance in action, and finalized by the case study of Alami.
Okay, a little bit introduction of myself. My name is Dima. I'm a banker turned entrepreneur on the startup field. I used to work at CD investment banking as well as Société Générale corporate and investment banking in Jakarta and Hong Kong. A lot of my workload before was doing loan syndication, US dollar bond issuance, a little bit of IPO and M&A. And then 2 years ago, I enrolled into INSEAD Executive MBA program where I quit my job and I started to develop Alami. It's my Sharia fintech startup. So just a little bit trivia about myself. During my free time, I like to watch Netflix and play PlayStation. And over to Guzelya.
Yeah, so I'm Guzelya. I have master's in international business. I studied in France, had also a year experience of studying in the US and South Korea. Currently, I actually work with Digitaraya. It's an accelerator program and Google Developers Launchpad. So a lot of involvement within startup ecosystem in Southeast Asia. Previously, I actually worked in Malaysia, helping various types of Islamic ventures. And I was actually introduced into Islamic digital economy there, so I became a huge enthusiast in it. My hobby and actually my previous, I'd say, career was connected to martial arts. I'm a Taekwondo athlete, but currently I'm taking it slow in terms of competitions. But yeah, that's shortly about me. So this is a Finance 101 part. We're not gonna be giving you a huge, I'd say, like academic introduction on what the finance is, but I really like how Investopedia sums it up. Basically, finance represents the money management and the process of acquiring needed funds. So the examples of types of finance, I mean, obviously a lot of you know there's like different types of finance, but to make it quick, there are differences between personal finance and like corporate finance, which is also known as asset management. In personal finance, it's basically, so personal finance is basically reception of your salary for your labor and the usage of the received funds for your expenses or investment in everyday life. When it comes to corporate finance, it's it starts from the acquiring money like from public or investors or other types of funds, and basically invest those funds into different types of assets. So basically all this financial transaction happening with money are considered to be finance, right?
Right. So I think Guzelya explained essentially things about finance is just money in and money out. So in terms of the big institutions, the way that they're getting money is usually from insurance money, individuals like ourselves, and the way they allocate their money or invest their money is through different options. So some goes to stocks, some goes to bond, and some goes to alternative investments. And as we can see, the title on this page is Irresponsible Finance, meaning that we're seeing what's going on back in 2008 during the global financial crisis, where the allocation of the money is not going to where it intended. So a lot of them are going to subprime assets, which creates the stock market crash. So in that event alone, 8 trillion of wealth were wiped out from the stock market. So it creates a instability on the global financial industry. But not only that, it also affected the people. A lot of the people lost their homes due to foreclosures, and there's a lot of unemployment, there were credit crunch, etc. So that really is being irresponsible on the financing in the global scale that not only impact businesses but individuals as well. So that's where we came to the term conscientious finance. So this is basically the industry's response to the crisis. So before, if you live pre-2008 in the bulge bracket banks or in the big banks, compliance is not really important. Everything is going to chase on the bottom line. But nowadays, we're working in big banks. We understand that compliance is the king now. So everything goes past through compliance. That's why it's a little bit more rigid. But the background is this crisis. And second of all, there should be no more too big to fail. So taxpayers' money shouldn't be used to bail out irresponsible financial institutions. So this is something that the system is trying to implement now. And after that, there's the initiatives for environmental finance. This is earmarked also by the COP21 in Paris, whereby big banks or supposedly banks, they shouldn't finance projects that is not environmentally friendly, like coal or CPO or etc. So the project that will be financed by banks need to follow the environmental and social and high governance. So it's summed up in this equator principle. So I think this is a form of finance that thrived post the global financial crisis, where everyone are asked to be more responsible in terms of conducting their business. So if we look at this conscientious finance, it's practically a socially responsible mode of financing with prudent financial management. So we're trying to contrast this concept with Islamic finance, which is based on fairness, transparency, and compassion. So while in the West, this term conscientious finance or ethical finance is growing and people are more aware on this, basically in Islamic finance, these kind of things are already put in place hundreds of years ago, but then this discipline is decoupled from the knowledge in the Western world, so called. So when we talk about Islamic finance, there are a lot of myths or misconceptions from the market. For example, we came up with 4 examples, but there are many others. First, it's only for Muslims. This is a big no, because Islamic finance is a system. It's a financial system that can serve everyone based on the principle guided in Islam. So the terms interchangeably with Sharia finance, when Sharia means a rule in Islam. And second, it's only profit sharing. There are a lot of people associate Islamic finance with only profit sharing, but actually in practice, profit sharing, for example in Indonesia, only constitute about 20 to 30% of the structure that being used in the market. The most structure being used is the buy and sell structures. So there are other schemes in executing Islamic finance. Terrorist financing. There are so many people, predominantly in the West, that misunderstand terms of Sharia with terrorists. So basically, even terrorism is condoned in Islam itself. So this is a big no, and it exists only in Middle East. So this is also a wrong misconception, because the country that leading in Islamic finance practice in Southeast Asia is Malaysia, and Indonesia is catching up, and in the West is UK. So these are some of the myths that we're trying to demystify to provide a better understanding of the Islamic finance, which is closely linked with conscientious finance.
And when it comes to Sharia itself, Sharia is not a Islamic law in one, right? I mean, this is how people think of it. So Sharia basically it's an ideology, it's a philosophy and basis of Islam. So if you ask, what is this philosophy? What is this core of this Sharia? So basically there are 5 rulings, objectives as known. They are also known in Arabic as maqasids of Sharia. So first of all is the protection of religion, meaning the issues surrounding like apostasy in reference to the protection of Islam, and also other religions. Actually, every human has the right to choose their religion, right? So objectives of Sharia, of whoever, whatever territory the Sharia law is covering, they have to protect people of religion. Protection of life. So basically everything that can basically defend you from threat when it comes to citizens, obviously. Third is protection of intellect. So whatever that might affect your rationality and reasonability, and that would cause you damage and to others, is supposed to be prohibited or protect you from that. Then it comes to the protection of lineage and dignity. It's basically, when there is a chaste women or man, also when there is like bodily harm, injuries. So basically protecting you physically, and protection of property. So everything that is connected to crimes such as stealing, robbery, and breach of trust. So as you can see, it's like basic human rights, right? I mean, of course, we can go into subcategories of these objectives of Sharia, but within the Quran and generically speaking, these are the 5 core human rights that Sharia promotes. And if the Sharia business or Sharia finance, Islamic finance, are not following these things, are not being fair and transparent and humane, then it does not correspond. It's not Sharia compliant. So as a Muslim from the West, so for me, it was quite hard to actually be exposed to Islamic finance. I started to really, look for the alternatives of conventional finance, like how to make my life more ethical, how I can find a better mortgage, right? So I had a lot of questions, and I did a lot of research, and so far, me and also Dima is agree that these are the steps that could actually help any of you who is willing to discover an alternative to be a better Muslim in terms of financials. are the following. So step 1 is always make sure you pay your credit bills at time to avoid interest rate, and of course paying off your loans. Step 2 is stop your credit card. This is like really hard. I mean, I had 2 credit cards and I travel often, but thanks God, you know, last year I completely stopped my credit cards, and you know, actually I spend less. Yeah, so step 3, we would say like try to learn more about Islamic finance and its fields of application. So Islamic finance is not only like Islamic banks where you can have an alternative like bank account. No, not only that, there's insurance, which is also known as takaful. There is mortgages, there is investment opportunities, social finance. There are the ways of conducting your business correctly. So if you own a business, or if you want to work for a certain business that does not contradict your ethical or religious values, you could actually look at the like learn more about how to conduct business in a Sharia compliant way, for instance. And there's obviously capital markets and stock investment even in many countries that are specifically focused on Islamic and Sharia compliant businesses. And last but not least, of course, try to like adopt all these things and actually raise awareness, right? Like share with your friends that are looking for an answer. Just raise awareness so that people are not thinking that when you say like, oh yeah, I have an Islamic bank, so they don't think of you as if you're like financing a terrorist organization. Yeah. So these would be like quick steps on how to start them. So I personally did this way, and thanks God, I think I'm quite successful. I wasn't able to adapt all of them, but slowly I'm getting there.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's a process that counts, and nobody has the same speed. So it's really based on your background and your context. So a little bit about Alami. Alami, it's a financial technology company. So we're a fintech company that promotes Sharia finance. It stands for Alif Lam Mim, from the first 3 letters of Surah Al-Baqarah. And the business is essentially like a bond. So if you're thinking to invest in a bond market, you're basically you're becoming a note holders of these big companies that will pay their coupon every 6 months, for example. So in Alami, instead of financing these big companies, we're financing the small and medium enterprises, SME. So everybody can invest in a Sharia compliant way to give out debt to this SME that needs financing. And Alami will curate the type of SME that is safe and growing to be able to be financed. In addition to that, we also do education in our social media to improve the financial literacy and also the Sharia financial literacy, so that it's easy to understand. And last but not least, we also have and we're developing our social impact. So not only the SME that will get the financing and investors gonna get the returns, we're also gonna have the option for the investor to donate to the bottom of the pyramid. So the idea is to have a virtuous cycle of money flowing through people in need, that need money and need help, and people that in needs of decent returns. So we're based in Indonesia, and we're helping Indonesian SMEs so far. We're still pretty early stage, 2 years. We've raised seed capital from notable investors, and we're the first startup that raised in a Sharia compliance way from reputable VCs in public market as well. Okay.
Yeah, so if you're interested to learn more about Islamic finance or about the industry itself or about the products or get any advice, we will try to help you with whatever we know. This is a quick introductory presentation that we prepared with Dima, but we will be really happy to answer your questions right now in the Q&A session, which will start in a minute. And also you can contact us through LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. Facebook, we have Alami Sharia's page. Instagram and LinkedIn, we have our personal pages. So feel free to follow us, add us, and talk to us. So thanks. Okay, so wait, let me just. So I got the question here on the general chat. So can you give us a quick overview of Indonesian Islamic finance industry?
Okay, the Islamic finance. So I think to have a step back, one step. Indonesia is the largest country which has the Muslim population. However, our Islamic finance industry, in terms of market share, is still very low. So it's about 6% of the total banking assets for our Islamic banks. And in terms of Islamic finance penetration combined with capital markets, it's about 8%. So total industry size is around 30 billion US dollars at the moment, but we're growing very fast. So because over the last 5 years, we have this hijrah mentality, which means it derived from the Prophet Muhammad SAW, hijrah from Mecca to Medina. But in Indonesia, hijrah means moving from a bad habit to a good habit. So the Islamic lifestyle itself has been a phenomenon over the last 5 years, and we're seeing the market picking up very quickly, especially last year, shown by the number of account opening in Sharia banks has grown tremendously, and it also impact our business that we have disbursed about 5 million US dollars in the last 8 months, and it's pretty fast. So it's still very early for Indonesia, but it's growing very fast in the next 5 to 10 years, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so the second question.
I'm curious about Islamic finance.
Yeah, I'm curious about Islamic finance, like growing in the UK, right?
So yeah, Islamic finance has been very strong in the UK. Some of the universities that is pretty well known on Islamic finance, one of them is Durham University. We know that a lot of people from this part of the world go there to study Islamic finance. The banks themselves, they have Islamic finance windows, or even pure Sharia banks like Al Rayyan banks in the UK. And last time I heard there's a new digital bank dedicated for Islamic finance in the UK. So we're really we haven't really been in touch with the UK market, but I would say it's one of the leading market in the West, and I think going forward there should be more collaboration between the East and the West on that.
Yeah, I think also for UK, in terms of like the growth, it's been quite leading and fast. I mean, first of all, it's obviously one of the leading financial markets, and secondly, in terms of fintech, like financial technology wise, it's been quite updated on the regulations. So this also facilitates adoption of whatever alternative finance you have. When there is technology, it always makes things easier. So a lot of Islamic startups that are within the Islamic finance industry, they're approaching this market through technology, through fintech. So this is why I'd say it has been quite leading in growth. So the next question is that I've heard that there are Islamic banks in Australia. What is the difference between a regular bank and Islamic bank? Is it easier to get a loan, for example? So
yeah, let me take that. So I recently met with the head of Islamic banking division of NAB, the National Australia Bank, and I think they're still very Small. In the division, it's only 2 people, and mostly they are accommodating funding coming from the Middle East to Australia, which is not as many. So we understand though in terms of the digital bank, there are plenty of them popping up in Australia, given of the regulation itself. So we're seeing and monitoring the market as well, in case there's more development on this. The difference between regular bank and Islamic bank, it's really Islamic banks in their loan structure. They use this Sharia principle structure in terms of money, getting money or interest. They link it up to the asset. So, for example, buy and sell scheme include the asset being transferred, or the profit sharing scheme includes the risk being shared. So essentially these are the difference, but to put it in an easier analogy to understand, for us Islamic bank or Islamic finance is more similar like the electric car. So electric car is more expensive just because the technology is new, the concept is newer, and the adoption is still very low. However, electric car, it's better for the society because it reduces pollution, and the source of the power, it's renewable. As people adopt the technology, the cost of the technology and adoption rate becomes lower and higher, so that then people would find it an equilibrium and can compete with the fossil fueled car. So the same with Islamic finance. So now the adoption is still quite low, so that's why the cost, especially in Indonesia, is a little bit higher. But but it's good for the society, as in it really involved the real assets being transacted. So it less likely to create economic bubble and burst. But yeah, once more adoption happen, the cost of transaction would getting low as well, so it can be competitive. So this is how I put an analogy on this to industries.
Yeah. So I think like when Dima talks about the Islamic bank being connected to the real asset, and this is where the cost is justified, is basically the main difference between conventional and Islamic finance or banks, meaning the money, actually the relationship to money. Money is viewed as a commodity within the conventional finance, meaning we can actually trade money to money, right? So we can buy, we can loan money and get the interest rate, where we actually acting like money is a commodity, money is a product, money is an asset, which is a completely unacceptable within Islamic finance, meaning money is considered as a means of transaction rather than a commodity itself. So if we have money in one side, we have to have a real asset that equilibriums it on the other side. So this is where all this comparison and difference and cost is coming. So the next question is, what is your view regarding Indonesian Islamic finance industry? Why isn't there any big players compared to conventional ones yet? Is government support is an issue?
Yeah, I think with regards to the Indonesian Islamic finance industry, it relates to my previous answer. The industry itself is pretty much newer to the conventional finance, so hence the cost of funds is higher. And second of all, a lot of the Sharia banks in Indonesia are a subsidiary of a bigger banks. So being a subsidiary means you have less focus in terms of the management focus, in terms of the capital expenditure allocation, and also manpower. So given that this subpar resources, that you can only compete so much with the more established, bigger conventional banks. Having said that, I think technology will change this trend. So we're seeing more Islamic fintech popping up in Indonesia, and in fact Indonesia has the most Islamic fintech firms in the world. So I think this spirit and these trends will shape the Islamic finance industry going forward. So being a fintech, we don't have legacy issues of banks and as rigid regulation as those implemented for banks. So we're hopeful, actually.
So the next question is, what are the biggest challenges to Islamic finance being fully adopted? Okay, I think we could speak on both, perspectives, but let me start first. I mean, when it comes to West, I think it depends on the countries, but generally speaking, first of all, the label, right? The label Islamic will make a lot of, would create a lot of resistance, right? So there's a lot of movements against whatever Islamic is. So I'd say if Islamic finance would be fully adopted, it probably will not be named as Islamic. So we can already see a lot of examples of ethical finance, alternative, like there are fintech platforms, there are actually ethical banks that are coming up in the West that have actually the structure of the Sharia financial products, but are not labeled as Islamic. So I'd say first of all is the label, and secondly, whenever it comes to Islamic finance, one of the very big important institutions are central bank and of course like any conventional, any Islamic bank, right? So when it comes to Islamic bank, unfortunately, a lot of banks in specifically in Indonesia are not like very techy or are on the same level with the conventional because of lack of labor, let's say, or knowledge or expertise. So unfortunately, this thing would be the challenge for Islamic banks to be part of the very growing and actively being adopted industry. So they really have to level up their professionalism, and of course, in terms of central bank, unfortunately, it's a very big challenge. So the only way would be to have like financial instruments to make things smooth and collaborative, but like full adaptation. Of course, we cannot talk about full adaptation when it comes to central bank level. Yeah.
So yeah, just to add on that, I think we live in a financial system globally that is not Sharia compliant. So I think it will be very hard to implement 100% of the Islamic finance, because as we know, all of the central bank or even the currency are most of the countries' currency follow the movement of the US dollar, which is linked to the interest rates, etc. So as a practitioner, so we can only give solution in stages when at least there's a better option for the Islamic finance to be implemented. With regards to the implementation per country, I think there are three elements that is pivotal to implement this concept. One is the manpower. So manpower needs to be very strong. It has to be, like grade A type of people that push this. And the second is regulation. The regulation, both from the financial regulation and the Sharia fatwa, needs to accommodate the different types of products that is needed in the market, so that Islamic finance can be an obvious choice for everybody. And the third one, I think technology to growth hack this, and having the technology will lower the customer acquisition costs, which is badly needed for the Islamic finance to be able to compete with the conventional finance.
So I think we're having more questions. Can you give several examples of investments that are popular in conventional finance but barely fit into Islamic finance?
Bitcoin is one example of that. So
it's being very controversial, actually, right, in the industry. So basically, when it comes to Sharia and Islamic, of course, there's a lot of interpretations of structuring and ethics behind, and different schools of thoughts. So Bitcoin being quite controversial in a couple of them.
Yeah. So I think when I see the example of investments, that is popular in conventional finance because of the high returns is usually doesn't fit into Islamic finance. So, for example, invest in something that you don't really know is also categorized as maisir or like gambling. So if you put your money into the CDO, collateralized debt obligations, where you don't really know what's in it prior to the global financial crisis, that is actually doesn't fit into Islamic finance. Or invest in a stock of the industry that are prohibited, such as maybe alcohol or gambling, doesn't also fit into Islamic finance. And cryptocurrency, those who are really looking at the technical aspect, less so on fundamental, and even investing in FX, foreign currency trading, it's also I think less favorable into the Islamic finance, just because there's no fundamental activity, there's no underlying transaction in it. It's more speculative, so it's not encouraged. While it diminish your short-term opportunity, but for the society in the long run, the speculative arbitrage can be detrimental. So I think this is something that is not.
So this is the last question for now. There should be more platforms like Alami in in near future. I mean, how many percentage of financial institutions who practice true Sharia?
Well, I think it's debatable as well, because when we in a country, we need to follow the ruler, right? The emir. Yeah. So basically, we follow the National Sharia Council, the DSNMUI here in Indonesia. So this is where the Sharia banks also follow. So when we spoke about practicing true Sharia, that we follow the fatwa that are being issued by the DSNMUI. So in that case, there are about 34 Sharia banks or Sharia units in Indonesia. And in terms of the fintech, like peer-to-peer, there are only 12 that is pure Sharia. So for the bank that really is Sharia, it's not a subsidiary of a conventional bank, is only one, which is Bank Muam. So last question, it's you mentioned about technology which will be crucial for Islamic fintech as it can lower the CAC. But as far as I know, there are plenty of non-Sharia fintech also which possess a great technology power with strong funding behind it. How can Sharia-based fintech be competitive, especially if we assume people choose the product not based on their religious reason? This is a very good question. This is something that we are facing in the market as well. So the way Alami position our product, it's not solely because of the religious reason, but we also have a competing product. So essentially, in terms of business, we are competing on the product, the feature, the service. So if we use some sort of the Islamic value, which is the ethical and social values to serve our customers, I think it creates also a value that will be able ultimately to lower the CAC. So I think yes, there are other P2P that have a strong backing, but it doesn't mean going forward Sharia fintech couldn't have a strong backing or funding behind it, which will create a better technology. So I'll give you an example. Every other peer-to-peer or fintech, they have less daily usage in their apps. But for Sharia fintech, we can have some sort of Islamic lifestyle apps features in the apps. So in that case, the CAC would automatically be lower because there are more stickiness and there are more contents. and probably more words of mouth that can go around. So I think this is something that is remains to be developed and dig further. And obviously for this we need a strong funding, which is why we regularly stay in touch with the investors and always educate the investors of the importance of the Sharia market.
Okay, cool. Guys, do you have any other questions here? I guess there is a queuing. Okay. Returning the status of money to only being the means of buying commodity. How do you tackle the issue of currency value, as it's mostly based on speculation and not a gold standard? To be more precise, how does the current neoliberal economic world order and concepts such as quantitative easing align with Islamic concept of money?
Yeah, this is related to the point that we spoke earlier, that we live in a economic system that is closely linked to each other globally, and it's based on ultimately interest rate, inflation, and everything. So, and we live in fiat money, it doesn't link to a gold. So maybe going forward there would be more innovation that would link certain value of maybe blockchain or crypto to like a gold standard. But I think honestly it will take time for that to scale across the globe, because there are so many regulations from different countries. So the Islamic finance that we know now would need to coexist with the existing system. We cannot just turn the system upside down, but we can slowly implement a more sustainable mode of finance and responsible through the concept of Sharia finance, and hopefully ultimately it will lead to a correction in so-called economic system, but that's a moonshot kind of thing. So the concept of quantitative easing, for example, it's unfortunately still relate to the interest rate, and this is how the government control the money supply and the economy to keep on moving. So, and obviously it's not directly linked to the Sharia concept. That's why there's only such limit to quantitative easing, which I think the European Union has already maxed it out. They can't really go lower, so they change it to be exchange of short-term and long-term assets going forward. So these are the instruments that central banks or regulator came up with just to push the economy forward post the global financial crisis. So yeah, we, at least with Islamic finance concept, we're trying to reduce the potential crisis going forward by being ethical, being more responsible and social, and also link the financial transactions with the underlying assets.
I think this is also like goes with the fact that the global economy right now is driven by those that it's connected to history, right? All these colonizations and wars, it all explains the facts why like these things are the way they are nowadays, right? So what we as Muslims try to do, like those that are really passionate about trying to be a better person and live a more closer to the religion and ethics lifestyle, we actually learn more and step by step try to adapt what is possible to be adapted. So just to give you a quick example, of course, like you cannot go as far as like FX market or central banks of whatever country or region you live in, but let's just take simple thing as an insurance. So the insurance products for Islamic insurance products, they exist in several countries. They are also available in those countries where Islamic finance is not that popular, but it's quite rare still. And companies that need to be Sharia compliant need to have a Sharia compliant insurance as well, right? But unfortunately, if this product is not available in the country, then how to be? Like, does that mean that the company which doesn't have a Sharia, Islamic insurance is not Islamic, because they're still using the conventional insurance, because insurance is still needed. So at this point, we cannot judge this way, because it also depends on the availability and the capability. There is no availability of this product in this country, so let us be as compliant as it can go. So I think it's really important to, when you really go deep dive into the essence of a whole system on how to make the world completely perfect, it's quite difficult, because without diving into the politics, it's quite complicated, right? So what we can actually do is just to start from ourselves, just to take it slowly and see how far we can get with it. This is how I actually approached. I also had a quite difficult time to really accept the fact that, although we try so hard to make things work in a good way, at the end of the day, everything falls into conventional finance. Everything falls into the global market. There is nothing else that we can do. So yeah, but then there are things that we can actually do prior to the the diving into the core of what's happening behind the scenes, right? It's all about the intention. So this is also the basics of Islam, and also basics of the morality, where as long as you have good intention towards making things better, that's good enough. Yeah. So any other questions? Okay, then great. Have a good rest of the day. I know that a lot of us are in different time zones. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Walaikum salam.